Hey everyone, welcome to the Capital City Bourbon Show. This is your host Luke, and I'm here with my co-hosts Alex and John. We're thrilled to be here with you all today, so grab yourself a glass of whiskey and come join us on the porch.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the porch. It is a hot and sunny day here in Tallahassee, Florida, but you know that means the porch is primed, and I think we're all looking forward to drinking some whiskey. John, Alex, you guys ready?
So ready. We're going to be drinking some Wild Turkey today.
Way to ruin my intro, John.
I'm sorry.
So as my esteemed co-host here just mentioned, we're excited to be out on the porch today because we're tapping into some of our favorite whiskey from one of our favorite distilleries, of course, Wild Turkey. And we have a very special guest with us today. This is someone who's intimately involved with the distillery and the industry. And this is someone who has whiskey in his blood. And he's very knowledgeable and experienced. And we're just excited to have a conversation with him today. So please join us in welcoming the one and only Bruce Russell. Bruce, thanks for joining us.
Hey guys, I'm glad to be here.
So Bruce, we have all this great whiskey out on the porch today, and I am excited to dive into it. But before we get there, we just want to hear a little bit about you and kind of what you're doing for the distillery and what things you have going on.
Yeah, so I was a brand ambassador for Wild Turkey when I first started for the brand, and I'd done that for about 4 or 5 years. And I don't know, probably about almost 3 years ago now, Campari decided that I could be better utilized at the distillery. I kind of had a opposite intro into the industry as most other people. I think most other people get into the industry, a little bit older than I did, but also I think most or a lot of people that are other brand ambassadors, they kind of start on that side of things. So they start in the off-prem or in the on-prem and then get into brand work. I started in production. I grew up at the distillery and whatnot. So I kind of knew how whiskey was made and how we made our whiskey and how to make our whiskey pretty early on. But I had no clue even what, off-prem or on-prem meant. I didn't know how to make a single cocktail when I first got into this industry. So Campari wanted me to learn all of that, and I spent 4 or 5 years doing that. Now moved back to Kentucky, working in the distillery a little bit more. For my first year and a half, 2 years, I was working in and out of the distillery, trying to apprentice under different folks there, people in the warehouse, people on the distilling side of things, just trying to learn as much as I can. And then COVID put a halt on a lot of the going into the distillery work as everybody started to work from home and whatnot. But my roles changed again a little bit. Now I'm doing a little bit of brand work, like ambassador stuff, a little bit of education. I'm leading the single barrel program, the private barrel program. I'm taking that over as a private barrel lead. So getting to do a little bit of everything. They're using me, out with consumers, and also got me doing some stuff at the distillery. I'm also, my favorite thing to do is to poke around in the lab when we're doing product development. We've got a couple really neat things in the works, and it's kind of been the first year that Dad's let me tag along on the product development side of things. So it's been fun getting to learn like how these products are actually made and giving my 2 cents.
Well, I mean, certainly, the name Russell is synonymous with quality. Frankly, everything Wild Turkey puts out, I'm impressed with. Not only just, the sheer quality and the flavor and the depth of the whiskey, but the fact that you can do it and make it a readily available product. We aren't talking about necessarily allocated bottles for a lot of your offerings. These are bottles that are readily available, very fairly priced, and delicious whiskey, whether you're sipping it or making it in a cocktail. I mean, you really can't go wrong with any Wild Turkey offering. And that just blows me away. So we're thirsty. I'm not gonna lie. I want to start drinking. I can't help it.
You're always thirsty, Luke.
Hey, that's why we started doing this podcast. At least it gives us a reason to drink and not feel guilty about it. So, Bruce, you sent us some great bottles to have on the porch today. We got a couple ryes here and a bourbon. Where would you like to start?
Let's start off with that bourbon first.
Man.
So far different than it's so different than the ryes. I think it'd be good to get it out of the way.
So the bourbon we're having today is, of course, the Wild Turkey Rare Breed, which is a barrel proof bourbon.
Mm-hmm.
John, what is the proof on that?
You're gonna make me put on my glasses here.
116.8. So
Yep.
this is a nice high proof whiskey.
It's the highest proof we ever had for Rare Breed. We've been putting out Rare Breed, for almost 2 decades now, and the lowest it's been, I believe, is 108 something, and this has been the highest it's been at 116.8. I actually think this 116.8 though is probably as good as any of the Rare Breeds we put out. I'm a big fan of this. We had a 112 before this 116 that I personally wasn't as big of a fan of. It's a little bit different than most of the other Rare Breeds, but I love this whiskey. Rare Breed's probably my favorite, like readily available bourbon that we make currently. We could probably talk about some of the new stuff we got in the works later on in the podcast because there's something coming that's probably going to be my new favorite. But Rare Breed's awesome, that blend of 6, 8, and 12-year-old bourbons. Just Granddad's kind of chance to show people the whiskey he was drinking right out of the barrel. And if y'all have ever heard my granddad Jimmy speak on whiskey at all, he always says, he likes 6 to 12-year-old whiskey. And he means that. So even the Rare Breeds, I think a perfect example. It's 6, 8, 12. 6 being the youngest he likes, 12 being the oldest, 8 being kind of that perfect age for him. And then uncut with water.
So when you're making this Rare Breed, what size batches are you using for these bottlings?
So Rare Breed is quote unquote small batch for us. I always do in quotations because y'all probably know as well as anybody, small batch doesn't mean anything like technically or legally. We could put small batch on all our products if we wanted to, but for Wild Turkey, small batches are generally 250 barrels or less. Long Branch is actually the largest small batch we have, and it might be a little bit more than that at times. But most of them are right around 250 barrels or less. Same with this Rare Breed.
And is this 116.8 proof? Is it out there and on the shelves today?
It sure is. Yeah, it's available anywhere you can find any Wild Turkey. You can get that 116.8. That's one thing that you talked about early on about the being available. That is one thing I think we really pride ourselves on in Turkey is just about everything we make is pretty readily available, and it's all 30 to 65, $70.
Well, for the bourbon market right now, that's kind of an anomaly because, as you know better than anyone, bourbon is booming, and so many of these products are just so hard to find. And when you do find them, you see the markup, 10, 15 times the retail price. But Wild Turkey, with a few exceptions of some limited releases and some special things y'all put together, here in Tallahassee, we can go to Market Square and we can always find these on the shelves for a very, very fair price. And, as someone who really appreciates the spirit, that's just such a blessing to have, that just a consistent quality whiskey that's always available. We don't have to worry about, oh man, Wild Turkey Rare Breed's out of stock now, and chances are we won't find it again.
I'm with you on this particular Rare Breed. That's a great whiskey, and it might be one of my favorites. I've always kind of, motivated over to your 101s, and that's typically my go-to in the Wild Turkey. 116.8 proof. I can't remember, and we picked a lot of barrels up there with you. Picked one with you about 3 years ago, and I can't remember many, if any, being 116.8 proof. So that's a whole big proof for Wild Turkey, isn't it?
Yeah, even compared to a lot of our private barrel offerings, like you said, they generally don't get up that high. Into the barrel at 115. So we do have quite a few barrels that stay right around that 115 to 120 range. But, a lot of our higher proof stuff is going to go into this Rare Breed just so we can meet that 116.8 proof.
Yeah, this really is a phenomenal whiskey. I love that proof point. It's got just the right amount of burn. Doesn't take away at all. It definitely accentuates all those good bourbon flavors. I've had several Rare Breed offerings, but I love this higher proof one. It's so easy to drink despite that proof. I mean, we might not be leaving the porch for a while today, boys.
No, this is good drinking.
Yeah, for 116 proof, I mean, just right on the nose. It doesn't even singe anything, you get that that caramel sweetness right into some corn and nuttiness. I mean, it definitely doesn't come off as 116 proof. It's going down a little too easy.
No. Well done, my friend, and the tip of the hat to Tim West for making sure we got these bottles in here. He's been a great friend to us over here in Tallahassee.
Yeah, Tim's a good fella.
Sure is.
Lots of good times with Tim. We can't remember most of them, but we're pretty sure we had them.
Oh, good.
I'm sure they
very
exist
good. You certainly
somewhere.
get that Wild Turkey higher rye in there. And as a matter of fact, as you kind of graduate through these two ryes and that rare breed, it's almost like a tamer rye offering. I feel like
It's our bourbons and ryes are they're kind of counterpoints to each other. I think our bourbon, even though we don't have a super high rye content compared to a lot of other people, I think you do get a lot of like that rye spice flavor.
yeah, you do.
Definitely has a very specific kind of spicy note on the mid palate on a lot of our offerings. But it's kind of the opposite on our rye whiskey. We really fall into that kind of Kentucky style of rye. So it's like our bourbon has a lot of rye notes, rye spice, a lot of cinnamon, black pepper. But our ryes are kind of the opposite. They've got a lot of vanilla and caramel compared to most other rye whiskeys. So, a lot of these products, they're almost like in between a traditional bourbon and a traditional rye.
Well, Bruce, I want to tell you this story because this is very much contributes to my love of Wild Turkey.
Yeah.
You were talking about your granddad and his preference for whiskey and whiskey age, which I 100% agree with. But, it's not just that your family makes such great whiskey, it's how you make it. My first trip up to Kentucky years ago, we went to the Wild Turkey Distillery, and we did it just as a storm came in. It was a pretty rough looking storm, and I think most of the tours cleared out, and just everyone kind of, I don't know if they were hunkered down in their car or what, but I ran inside just to go into the gift shop and had some Russells reserved there. But I remember checking out, and the woman at the register said, that's a great bottle of Russells you got. You need to go have Jimmy sign that. And kind of threw me for a second. I was like, what do you mean? She's like, well, Jimmy, he's sitting right over there. You need to go have him sign that. And I turn around, and there he is, Jimmy Russell, just sitting in a chair at the distillery, having a good time. And I went up and talked to your granddad for a good half hour. And he was the most down-to-earth, personable, and just passionate person about whiskey I've ever met. And, I mean, who am I? And he's just sitting there talking to me, like I said, for a good half an hour about this whiskey and why he loves it and why it's special. And that has always stood out to me as an experience to just meet someone, who is as famous in the industry as your granddad, but who still is there every day and takes that much pride in the product your family puts out. That to me says so much about all of y'all that I just wanted to tell that story because it's one of my favorite whiskey experiences.
It's not uncommon to hear stories like that about Jimmy. He's definitely a unique character. Me and Dad probably wouldn't take credit for, the kind of love for the distillery and the brand and the whiskey and the people. Like we have maybe a drop of what he's got because he's not even supposed to be at work right now. Like during all the COVID stuff, as things go back to normal, he'll be able to come back to work. But he hasn't actually supposed to come to work. For the past year and a half, they've kind of told him not to come. He still tries to come every day. Usually what him and my grandma do is they'll like show up in her minivan and then just do circles around the parking lot, just kind of to like make sure everything's okay, make sure like everybody showed up to work that's supposed to be there. Maybe to yell at me or Dad or something. It's that's probably like something that I've taken from him. Dad has talked to me a lot, like one-on-one, just about like whiskey making and actual production and thought process on making products and whatnot. Jimmy's taught me some of that, but a lot of what Jimmy's taught me is just, to be grateful for what we have and to be grateful for the whiskey and amazing people that we get to meet. It's sheer luck. I don't know if y'all know like how Jimmy got started, but he was 19 years old. Just about to be 20, right around that age. My grandmother actually was the secretary at the distillery at the time. His dad worked at the distillery, and Jimmy was trying to be like a pro baseball player and a couple other things, but nothing he actually wanted to do was making him any money. And then my grandma got pregnant with my aunt and basically, was like, you need to get a real job, Jimmy. And then Jimmy started working. I call him Mimi is what I actually call my granddad. And so Mimi got a job at the distillery, and he played like on their semi-pro baseball team. They used to have those at these big companies back then. He was like a ringer for one of those semi-pro baseball teams they had. I'm thinking it's because he was just like so good at sports, and he was actually super well known in the community because he was a big time, all-state athlete and all that kind of stuff. He got a lab job, which is very unusual. Usually I have to start off like my dad did, like, rolling barrels and painting the fence and stacking cases and that kind of stuff in the back. But Jimmy got a pretty good job. He started working in the lab and just kind of fell into the favor of the current master distiller at that time, this old man named Bill Hughes. And Bill Hughes was an old man. He made our whiskey before Prohibition and then came back after Prohibition all the way until he died at the distillery, I think, like in the early 60s. But taught Jimmy basically everything he knew. And then I think he died of a stroke at the distillery, and Jimmy was the only one that knew all the secrets and stuff. So they wanted him to be master distiller or not. My granddad just ended up luckily being the one that fell into favor of this old tenured master distiller. And, even today, Dad's master distiller, he's only the fourth master distiller we've had since 1860s.
Wow.
That's amazing.
And so I think Jimmy really does, he realizes, we're him not getting that job away from just being folks that work in union like everybody else does in Lawrenceburg. And he feels very, I think, fortunate and blessed. And he really does, I think, appreciate, even more so than me and Dad even, really appreciate like what we have and the people that really care about what he does. It doesn't surprise me. He talked to you for half an hour. I've seen him sit there, he would talk to the chair next to him if he thought that chair really cared about the whiskey we made, and then when somebody like you that shows up that actually does care and knows a little bit about it and wants to talk to him, I mean, you probably made his whole day. That's what he lives for, more so than even the whiskey, is that kind of person-to-person interaction at a bar, at a restaurant, or in that visitor center. And it's the reason why I'm happy to, anytime anybody asks me to do anything, as long as I can do it, I'm going to say yes, because how many other people that I grew up around get to do the kind of cool stuff that I get to do, travel around the United States, meeting amazing people, drinking amazing whiskey, it's we're lucky for sure. And Jimmy kind of instills that in us.
That's a great story, and it's not one I haven't heard and haven't spent quite a bit of time with Jimmy Russell and up there and down here. And I found he's pretty much the same way when he's been on the road and working his way around the state of Florida, for example. And he sits out and talks and signs bottles for as long as anyone's there that would like a bottle signed. And then, according to legend, he'll might head out to one of his bars and say, "Take me to one of our consumers or customers out there," and sit there and entertain everyone. And he's the last one out of there. I mean, you got to cut the lights out.
I'll tell this tale on him. There's a pretty popular event that happens once a year in the industry called Tales of the Cocktail. Y'all probably heard of it.
Yes, in New Orleans.
Oh, yeah.
It happens down there in New Orleans. And my first time going down there to Tales of the Cocktail, New Orleans got the best of me my first night.
It usually does.
Yeah, and I was sneaking back into the hotel. We had this thing, like a breakfast event the next day. Me, Dad, and Jimmy were also to eat breakfast with a group of select bartenders that sold a lot of our brand. And I didn't want them to catch me coming in super late, so I thought I was sneaking in. It was about 4 o'clock in the morning, And as I was walking in, somebody else was in the elevator, and they held their arm out on the elevator, for me to sneak in. I had my head kind of down, didn't want anybody to see who I was, Thank you, sir. And I get in, and then I hear, "Bruce, what are you doing?" And then I look up, it's Jimmy. He had closed out the hotel bar until 4 in the morning. And then he was the only one still up, I think, in the whole hotel. And he's like that still to this day. If there's people to hang out with and there's some whiskey to drink, he's right there with you. I mean, he's life of the party. He's one of a kind.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
He was good enough to spend his 85th birthday down here with us.
I remember that. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, he's something. I could tell 100 stories on Mimi, just like being funny with the way he interacts with people, or staying up super late, or it's not a very uncommon thing. I've got to travel the country, and I'll be in like a big market. I'll have a big group of friends, bartenders, liquor store owners, just people in the industry, sometimes just enthusiasts. And it's not very uncommon where I'll get a call from a buddy of mine or a text or a FaceTime. It'll be 2:00 in the morning, when Jimmy was still traveling. And it'd be a buddy of mine in a bar, closing down some New York bar with Jimmy. And I'll be the one, stuck at home in bed. Yeah, he'd still be doing that right now if he could, for sure.
Well, it's so wonderful that all three of you are still above the grass and able to share these stories. That I don't think it's so much a matter of big shoes to fill as you come along the way, because both you and your dad, I mean, you start out and you're learning the business, you grow up in the business, and the fact that you're Russells is just happenstance, is that you're Russells, because the fact of the matter is you're earning your own stripes, as one might say, and I experienced that obviously with your dad, with Eddie, and tasting so many of these great releases that he came out with. I think he started making some serious changes in the type of special offerings that we were seeing coming out, and some of the bigger, bolder, crazier things that he did, the Unforgivens, the 1998s, and those types of things. So I'm really anxious to see how your influence starts coming on this. If it's anything like our only barrel pick I've been on with you, it's going to be good, and it's going to be sweet, and it's going to be tasty. Let's drink another.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm thirsty. I finished that bourbon.
Let's do it.
So why don't we try this Wild Turkey 101 Rye?
Let's do it.
That's a nice proof.
So 101 Rye actually has a super interesting history at the distillery. We've had a rye whiskey available since at least Jimmy started in 54. And we were making 101 rye back then too. Now, we didn't always produce 100% of our rye. That's something that a lot of people don't know. There was this connotation out in the industry that bourbon had to be made in Kentucky and you couldn't make it anywhere else. There's a reason why back then a lot of people would source their bourbon from Kentucky, even if they didn't have it in Kentucky. Same reason why people still do that some. But there was also this connotation that it wasn't rye whiskey unless it was made in Pennsylvania or Maryland. You couldn't make good rye whiskey in Kentucky. And so Jimmy and them actually used to source a lot of our rye whiskey from Pennsylvania and Maryland. A big bulk of it coming from the original Penco plant, what people know as Michter's, the original Michter's out there in Pennsylvania. And we sourced our rye whiskey that was put into 101 rye all the way up really until the 80s, until we started to make it ourselves. The recipe switched over into what you're trying there, and what you're trying there is a very classic Kentucky style rye. So on the Rare Breed and the 101, they're the same recipes. To be considered a rye whiskey, you only have to be 51% or more rye in your recipe. Well, we're very barely above that.
Yeah.
We're just barely a rye whiskey, and most of that's made up in corn. We're mid-30s in corn content. And so you're looking at something I think that tastes a little bit different than stuff that's got a super high rye content. A lot of the stuff that comes out of MGP that's at 95.5, I think it's a lot drier, a little bit more deal, a little bit earthier than ours.
Right.
There's a little bit more baking spice, a little bit more vanilla.
Mint.
A little bit of sharpness and dryness. It still ends very short on the palate, but it's almost in between that real high rye content rye, like the stuff coming out of Indiana and a bourbon. I love the other style of rye whiskey. I've got a bunch of those bottles just sitting up here on my shelf that I drink all the time because I drink all our stuff at work. But, obviously I'm going to be a little bit partial to this kind of Kentucky style that most of the people here make with, us, Heaven Hill, Sazerac, Beam. A lot of those people have a lot more corn in their rye than most of the people out of the state.
Yeah, and I've always liked your rye, frankly, better than anything for your sit down and everyday drinker, because you do pay a proper respect to corn. It's, you don't leave home base that much to get to a whiskey. Yeah.
But Jimmy's been making rye whiskey now for 60 something, almost 70 years.
Damn.
And he really doesn't like it. I mean, people will get him to try all kinds of stuff. The late Dave Pickerel used to come to the distillery quite often. He'd get Jimmy to try whatever he was concocting at that time out of whatever distillery he was working at that time. And even his old buddies like that, he'd tell people, I know, he's like, this is pretty good rye whiskey, but I don't like it.
That sounds like it. And the fact of the matter is the fact that you stayed true to your bourbon, to your corn roots and bourbon roots, and making your rye comes through in a rye offering that us bourbon drinkers aren't put off by. It's not such a departure that we can't sit down and enjoy a drink of this. And if you're drinking it blind, and we have done this, and we've done it with some very particular tasters who claim to know everything in the world about tasting whiskey, and you can put it in there and say, okay, tell me which one is the rye, and more times than not, they can't tell us which one is the rye. It's close enough.
No, it's I've had people try to do that before too, and it's usually because they focus on the wrong thing. If you focus on the finish of the whiskey, you can tell a rye whiskey from a bourbon almost every time.
There you go.
That bourbon compared to a rye, bourbon will last a whole lot longer. It'll linger in the chest or the belly. It's got that nice, almost warming effect. Rye whiskey ends very short, but I agree with you. If you're just trying to focus on the flavor, sometimes it's hard to determine the difference between a Kentucky style kind of rye whiskey and then a high rye bourbon. There's not that much difference in some of these recipes.
That's right. Now there are other guys out there, you think, putting out a rye that's close to this in terms of content?
There's a lot of people in Kentucky that do that kind of higher corn, lower rye style. It's about all the major people in Kentucky are making at least one or two rye offerings like this now. A lot of the classics like Overholt or Rittenhouse. Those are going to be a lower rye content than the stuff made out of NGP, so it's going to be a little bit closer to this. But I think rye whiskey is I'm a rye whiskey fan even more so than a bourbon fan, and I think when you look at a lot of these cool new kind of craft distilleries that have been popping up in the past decade to 15 years, and even some of the hottest ones that are just now getting kind of popular right now, rye whiskey to me always seems kind of the way to go for those guys. And I think a lot of the smaller guys are making super great and interesting rye whiskey. Just doesn't take as long to age as bourbon, which is why our ages are even a little bit younger. And I think if you're a rye whiskey fan, there actually wasn't that much rye whiskey 10, 15 years ago. You really had to get rye from, us or Heaven Hill or Jim Beam. That's basically it. And now, everybody's got a bunch of rye offerings. A lot of the small guys are making rye whiskeys. MGP is producing amazing rye whiskey every year under a bunch of different labels. It's a great time to be a rye whiskey drinker for sure.
Yeah, and you're right. 10, 12 years ago, even, I don't think there were about 2 or 3 ryes on the market out there. And people started getting busy trying to make it when it started getting some popularity there.
Well, it's interesting. I think a lot of people, obviously bourbon is our native spirit, but if you look at kind of the history of our country, rye was really the first whiskey in the U.S. And it kind of faded away for a while, and then bourbon took over, and obviously the rise and fall of bourbon through the 20th century. But rye is having this resurgence now, and Bruce, like you said, it's a great time to be a rye drinker because there's a lot out there that's challenging and innovative, and I think we're kind of coming back to our roots in terms of embracing rye whiskey, and I love to see it personally.
Yeah, it's whiskey's kind of taking this interesting turn that just due to like the ease of access of information now, where if I'm somebody in Kentucky that wants to start my own distillery, I can actually find out what these original recipes were. And I can now find out what the original grains were. And just with, just the way the world works, there's probably somebody producing that kind of heirloom, locally grown grain somewhere. So there's all these people doing such interesting, cool stuff, and really using kind of modern ways of making whiskey to reproduce stuff that, like you said, was the forefront of whiskey 200-300 years ago, that did die off. And I think rye whiskey is in a great spot right now. And year in, year out might be just as interesting or more interesting than bourbon. Because I feel like even us, our company is a little bit more, I think, willing to experiment on something like a rye sometimes than they are a bourbon, because our bourbon's kind of our bread and butter. It does so well one-on-one. It's never going to change. Whether we were here or not, one-on-one will keep chugging along. And I think rye, when you look at stuff like the Rare Breed Rye or them trying Cornerstone, I think that they're willing to experiment with this kind of cool, new, kind of unforeseen thing. It has been blown up. Rye whiskey's, it's blown up.
Well, we love it. I mean, you brought up the Cornerstone rye. That is amazing rye. We had a bottle out on the porch at Market Square. I mean, we couldn't put that. We drank, I think, half that bottle in an hour because it was just so phenomenal. I mean, we couldn't get enough of it, and we appreciate you all experimenting and sending that our way, because I could drink that rye all day. So we got one more rye with us while we're on the subject still, and this is the same mash bill, but it's a little higher. This is at 112.2, and of course, this is the Rare Breed barrel proof rye.
Yep. So this is currently my favorite thing that we make.
I see why.
Rye fan over a bourbon. So, Rare Breed's probably my go-to bourbon, but this Rare Breed Rye, what I drink on a day-to-day basis, if I'm having a pour, it's a blend of 4, 6, and 8-year-old rye whiskeys at 112.2 proof. You'll notice it has a little bit better mouthfeel than the normal Rare Breed too, because it is non-chill filtered, where the Rare Breed is still chill filtered for the time being. I just think this product is awesome. It's a whole lot more complex than most of our rye whiskeys because of those different ages. I think it's got this beautiful baking spice and vanilla. It's, I think, pretty sweet up front, and then ends with this beautiful, sharp kind of dry, grassy note. I couldn't be happier with the way the Rare Breed rye turned out. I've seen a whole lot of people online are loving it. It's probably the thing I've missed most the past year and a half is not being able to get out into market and talk to people about the stuff that we've put out. But it seems like people are pretty happy with this product, and I'm thrilled with it. So I'm glad that it seems like everybody else likes it too.
Yeah, this is just wonderful.
There's a lot missing from that bottle, Luke, and they just came in recently.
Well,
so I'm thinking that might be your favorite as well.
Yeah, I mean, this bottle, let's just say I did some work on it before we came out to the porch today.
Yeah, you only gave me a little bit, so, oh, man.
Yeah, I've got one drink out of it. You're almost gone.
In my defense, I did tell you to take as much as you want, Alex. I mean, if you're only going to take a little bit and leave me with that bottle, it's not going to last in my house.
This is a delicious drink, and I can see why it too would be one that you'd like. Let me kind of ask you a little behind the scenes question. I don't know how much you can share with us, but you talk about, you mentioned earlier in the show that you guys had some pretty interesting things that you were working on for coming out in the future. And I'm wondering how does that work? Is it one or two or three of you, or are there a number of tasters or people involved in saying, let's take a look at this, let's try this, or are you in the lab trying different variations of things? How does a new product come to be?
So each product kind of is a little bit different. Outside of Master's Keep, Master's Keep's really the only thing that we currently have that is like, we know we're going to try to do something every year under the Master's Keep line. As long as we continue to have liquid we think good enough to put into a bottle like that. So for Master's Keep, yeah, there is a team of folks led by a fellow named Norm Matella at our distillery, who's in control of kind of our product development and whatnot. And he has a team of folks there that work with Dad. And then I'm just lucky enough to get to, poke my head in the room and try some of this stuff as it's going along and give my 2 cents. But Norm, and he's got somebody under him, Shaylin Gammon, and then Dad are really the kind of the main 3 working on there with our inventory guy, James Toby, because he, like somebody like James or somebody at the distillery could have more of a say into kind of a normal product. Like we're coming out with this Russell's 13 year that is coming out, Campari's got a press release, so I'm allowed to talk about it. We've got ahead of the game where people weren't able to like get us before the TTB labels or whatnot or whatever. And so the 13-year-old's coming out. And really, this was just some of our inventory folks recognizing that we had a lot of liquid. It was right around 13 to 15 years of age, that it was tasting really good. And we needed to do something with it. And they made our brand team aware of that. It ended up being amazing juice, and wow, we're able to bottle it up. So sometimes when it's something we kind of know what we're going to do, there's a lot more planning involved, and there is a team of folks that like we're just now tasting for not this year's Master's Keep, but for like 2-3 years Master's Keeps down the line, we're coming up with like ideas for it. And when we're in the lab, we're really just trying to figure out what liquid we have on site that is like really good right now, what's interesting, what's kind of got our mind going. And then it's easy for somebody like me or Dad because we can drink some of this liquid that Norman then put aside. We find it interesting, and then that product development team can work on that liquid for us. And then they're really the ones behind the scenes coming up with different blends, working in the lab, and then able to present somebody like Dad more samples in, let's say, a month. Okay, we listened to your ideas, Eddie. Here are the 4 or 5 kind of results of what you wanted to do. Now, out of these 4 or 5, where do you think we should go? And then you just kind of continue to focus and hone in on what that final product's going to be. So sometimes it's just we have amazing 15 or 17-year-old liquid that we don't want to do anything with. Sometimes it's, hey, we tried this really good 15-year-old liquid, but we feel like it's not quite there. And then, maybe we have some sherry barrels like we did for, one of the offerings sitting around, or that Dad wanted to do some experimenting with, introduce that 15-year-old in the sherry barrel. Turns out to be really good. Cool. This is what we're going to go with. So there's always kind of a handful of ideas at any given time. And then Dad and that team now get to kind of hone in on, okay, this is the idea that's going to work for us because of the liquid we have. And because this is what's trending sometimes in the industry. There have definitely been ideas that we wanted to do. And then within the year or two that we were trying to come up with that idea, competitors have put out like the exact same thing that we were wanting to put out. And then we're like, okay, we can't do that. We got to go to plan B. So it's a super long drawn out process. Usually takes about a year or two to really hone in on what we want to do. Outside of Long Branch took way longer than everything else.
Wow. Now, when all of this process is taking place and that team that you mentioned is putting things together, is someone poking around in the warehouses and punching these barrels and literally trying to make a determination of how that bourbon is, or rye, in that whichever case is aging in that barrel? Someone's poking around doing that, and is it members of the team or someone else?
Yeah, so that team won't be poking around inside of the warehouses unless there's like a specific need. If we know that there's like these really good, I'd say 15-year-old barrels in warehouse D or something, which I'm not saying there is, but yeah. They would be going in there and maybe selecting some samples from the 15-year-old barrels to continue to experiment on or taste in the lab. But we have a normal, warehouse and quality control team. And a lot of times some of them might be taking samples out of those barrels for their anniversary sampling. And that would be done not by product development. That would be done on the distillery side by our inventory team and quality control. And so about every 2 years, we're trying to taste our whiskey. And so, 2 years in, you might not know what a whiskey is going to be, but 4 to 6 years in, you pretty much know at that point, okay, this is going to be stuff that we think is aging very well. So we're going to continue to set it aside and allow it to become an older product. 101, maybe it goes into Rare Breed or Russell's. And then, maybe if it ages there and it starts to pick up super spectacular notes, and it might go into something like a Russell's Vintage or a Master's Keep. And then on the flip side, if we taste stuff at 4 years old and we think that hey, this whiskey is good right now where it's at, because this happens a lot, like we fear if we continue to let this whiskey age, it's going to pick up bad characteristics. So a lot of times that happens on the top floors. It's got a lot of heat in there. It's picking up a little bit too much oak, or it's turning a little bitter, a little astringent. That's when we'll go ahead and pull the trigger and go ahead and use that 4-year-old in something like American Honey. Or if it was 6 or 8 years old and it's tasting like a really good Wild Turkey right now, we're scared to age any longer. 6 years old, it might go into something like the 81 proof bourbon, or if it's 8 years old, maybe Long Branch or 101. We're kind of at the mercy of Mother Nature. So whatever she decides to do to our barrels, that's what we got to do. So if it's ready at 8 years, we've got to put it something in at 8 years old. If it's ready at 15, great, we'll use it for Master's Keep. Because if we don't use it by about 15 years old, our barrels, they generally go pretty sour.
Yeah.
So we kind of have between 6 and 15 that we can really work with at our distillery.
Now, have you poked around those warehouses yourself?
Yes, sir, I sure have. I poked around them quite a bit when I was a little kid, when I probably shouldn't have been. That's what my dad did when I was a young child, is he was the maturation supervisor. So he led the teams of union workers and that would roll the barrels and stuff like that. And so I'd get to hang out with his guys a lot. And then I've got to spend quite a bit of time in the warehouses, as an adult as well. It's always my favorite place. It's Dad's favorite place as well. It's where the whiskey's at. It's where the magic's happening. To me, although distilling is super important, and if you don't have a good, if you don't have a good distillate, you're not going to have a good finished product. But to me, distilling is super simple, like on paper. You're following a recipe. If we follow the same recipe every single day, we're going to have pretty good juice. Usually, we're going to have pretty good liquid, and it's automated now. The distillery runs itself. It's just following Jimmy's recipe from way back in the day at a grand scale now. But we still don't really know exactly why our barrels taste the way they do in the warehouses, the way they do. We've run into the past few years some awesome barrels out of Camp Nelson, which is an offsite aging location in our distillery. We'd never had that run on super quality barrels at Camp Nelson before, so nobody really expected it. All of a sudden, Camp Nelson F started putting out amazing barrels. If we knew why that was, then we could age all our whiskey that way, but we don't. And to me, that is by far the most interesting part of our industry is. And I mean, you all know, because I know y'all been in the warehouse. You'll get 2 barrels sitting in warehouse A. They both aged side by side. I call them sister barrels because they'll come from the same day. They'll have the exact same distillate in them. They'll sit on the same shelf side by side. They'll taste completely different.
Yeah.
And that kind of unexplained phenomenon, like we know why the flavors develop inside those barrels. We know the chemicals that make those flavors, but we don't really know why that one barrel ends up super sweet and the other one ends up super fruity. And to me, that's so much more interesting than everything else we do. That I get like you all do when you show up in warehouse. Hey, I geek out when we try a barrel. And it's like, whoa, I've never tasted this before. That's the stuff that keeps me coming back to work for sure.
Yeah, that's what keeps us coming back up there as well.
Absolutely.
What a trip, Bruce! It's amazing to hear your enthusiasm for the brand and for everything it takes to make all of this work. And I can't tell you how much good it does an old soul to see this kind of enthusiasm coming from a young soul up there, and knowing that this brand is going to continue with its traditional good whiskey. And my hat's off to you and your dad and your granddad and to everybody up there that makes Wild Turkey work. It's a lot of fun. It's damn good drinking.
Well, Bruce, if you ever want to get into another business, I highly recommend you all go into the scented candle business, Because if you could make my house smell the way one of your rick houses smells, I would be a happy man for the rest of my life.
You could do that, Luke. Just bring barrels.
The first time I walked into a Wild Turkey rick house, that was the best thing I've ever smelled in my life. The best thing. That musky bourbon wood, just kind of that barn smell. Oh my God, it was amazing. I still remember that first visit there to this day, and that was the best thing I've ever smelled in my life. You could smell that bourbon leaking out of those barrels, and you just knew what magic was happening there.
It's almost that time of year because we don't have any climate control at our distillery. It's really just opening and shutting the windows. They'll open up the windows during the summer and close them during the winter. And right now, there's probably some warehouses that haven't had the windows open yet for the summer when it's getting warm. And the first time you walk into one of those rick houses that hadn't had the windows open or anything, you're getting that, just that damp kind of musty air just hits you when you open up that door. And it smells like the inside of a barrel. It is great.
It's amazing.
It's a one-of-a-kind thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, COVID is the CDC is turning us loose now, so we have a seat down here in Tallahassee with your name on it. I want you to get on down here when you get a chance.
Absolutely. We'd love to have you.
I'd be glad to get down there. I've been, stuck up here with cabin fever in Kentucky, seeing the same people every single day. So I'll be glad to get back out on the road.
Come on down.
Well, Bruce, one thing I want to ask you that you mentioned earlier, you might not be able to talk about this, but I want to ask anyway. You mentioned the sherry finish your dad did. And, I'm not a finished whiskey guy. I tend to not care for them because I think they're overdone. But I really enjoyed the sherry finish. Are y'all experimenting with any finishing right now you can talk about, or any products in the future that might be finished?
Nothing that I can talk about. We're always working on. Yeah, we're always working on different stuff. So, if and that's everybody. So this goes for anybody listening to this podcast. If you all don't think that every major distillery, and I mean that Brown-Forman, Heaven Hill, Jim Beam, us, Sazerac, we've all got crazy stuff in the works in the lab. Most of it never sees the light of day, right? So a lot of times you'll hear consumers say, well, why haven't you ever tried this? We don't want to tell them that, we've tried it like 8 times now. And we never can figure it out. Whatever the reasoning might be, it never does taste the way we want it to. We're working, we're always working on different things as far as just different ways that we can highlight that Wild Turkey flavor profile. I think sherry actually, we put out a sherry signature way back in the day. Jimmy did, and hearing stories from Jimmy and hearing stories for other people, it's almost like he did it out of spite. They like wanted him to do this sherry stuff, and so they aged whiskey in sherry barrels, and they aged them way too long. Like you pick up that sherry stuff pretty quick. They aged them way too long, and the whiskey just ended up tasting terrible. And so instead of actually aging them in those sherry barrels, they just took some whiskey and I think introduced them in the sherry barrels after that for like a couple of days, and then fortified it. So they just poured sherry into whiskey essentially. Just to like get it over with and put it out there. And that product's super interesting, but it's not very good in my opinion. And so Dad really wanted to do something that would kind of be the opposite. It just didn't taste like sherry poured into whiskey. It would be, it really would taste like a Wild Turkey whiskey with just the influence, a very light influence of sherry. And I'm with you. I don't really like too many finished whiskeys. And that's not my kind of cup of tea either. I've got too much Jimmy in me. I'm a purist, I actually thought that the Dad's sherry finished whiskey is some of the more interesting Master's Keep that he's put out. I thought it was an awesome product, and I hope that Dad gets a chance to do something like that. I don't know if y'all have ever heard him tell the story. You'll have to listen to him because I don't know the whole one. But he went up to Spain and hopped around with this barrel guy, this barrel broker up in there, and like hung out with him, was basically held hostage up there because the guy didn't want Dad to leave. He wouldn't show Dad his barrels. Dad had to hang out with him like the whole trip. And then finally at the very end, he showed Dad. His dad said he'd been looking for these giant sherry barrels, these large sherry butts. He couldn't find any that were any good. They all either had like brand new sherry in them or they'd never been used. And Dad was looking for something that had some old sherry. He said, very end, the guy like brought him back in this, like, he thought it was just this like crappy warehouse. And then sure enough, there's like a whole warehouse just full of these giant sherry barrels filled with, 50, 60, 70-year-old sherry. Just had been aging inside of these barrels or whatever, that he finally found the ones he needed. It was kind of pure luck that he found this guy, and that the guy ended up having all what he needs. So if we find some more super special barrels, but some stuff that Dad has thought about in the past is, taking some Scotch whiskey barrels that have had Scotch in them and then putting bourbon inside. We've thought about aging rye inside of bourbon barrels or bourbon inside of rye barrels. One thing we tried one time that didn't turn out, I was the only one at the whole distillery that liked it, is somebody on our team took bourbon barrels that had beer aged inside of them.
Yeah.
And then after the beer had been dumped out and bottled, we then reintroduced bourbon into it.
Jesus, you guys do try
that barrel. Yeah, I thought it was great, but I'm a big beer guy. My dad hates beer. He hated it because it tasted, like one of those bourbon barrel ales does. So yeah, we've got a million things in the works. I think the next big thing though is this 13-year coming out. It's a 13-year-old, right at barrel proof. It's a barrel proof, non-chill filtered, small batch whiskey. It's kind of nuts. That Campari finally, I don't say finally as in we really wanted to make it. I just never would have thought they would have made a product like this. It's almost like they got on r/like bourbon Reddit or got on one of these bourbon blogs or listened to one of these podcasts like you are putting on and listen to the actual enthusiasts, the bourbon nerds, the people that get really excited about this stuff like we do. And they just like checked the box, Okay. Extra age, okay, 13-year-old, age stamped, barrel proof, non-chill filtered, small batch, yearly available, less than $80. Like it's crazy that they're putting out this product. I'm super excited for it. It tastes insane in the lab. That's not always necessarily what's going to taste like in retail, but if it tastes like anything like our lab samples, it's going to be, one heck of a product. So
awesome.
We've got a lot of cool stuff like that.
Definitely excited for it.
Well, Bruce, how long till we see something that you're going to release?
Well, so as far as the whiskey that I've had any hand in doing it all, I do have like one little batch of whiskey that I think is probably around 6 years old now. It was whenever I was first trying to apprentice under Dad, Jimmy, I call Mimmy. Mimmy had me like on the distillery, kind of learning everything. And then he let me actually like grow the yeast one week with him and me and him and our distillery guy at the time kind of went into the distillery room and supervised, the distillation and the fermentation and the cooking. And I got to see it barreled up and then, got to see it as it was put up into the warehouses. And it was, it's my whiskey. First one I ever got to do, really the only time I've ever got to do it all from the beginning to the end. And it's about 6 years old, so hopefully sooner than later. I don't know if I haven't actually tried the aged whiskey recently, so hopefully it's still good. Jimmy tried the distillate and he didn't dump it in the sink, so
there you go.
Yeah, good enough, I guess.
You're on the right track.
I'm confident in it.
Yeah, because I
have a feeling it'll be great.
Well, you were talking earlier, you said if my whiskey tastes anything like what I was picking out in the warehouse, well. I've got the benefit. I get to pick out all the whiskey that Jimmy and Dad's made. They're Hall of Famers at this. I get to just walk in the warehouse and be like, that one's good. Well, of course it is. Jimmy or Dad made it, It'll be when it's actually my juice, I think that it'll be a little bit harder to pick through what's good. Because, if I'm a quarter of the whiskey maker that Dad and Jimmy are, I'll be doing better than anybody else that's out there for sure, awesome. That's one thing that I definitely don't take for granted is
I think it starts with tasting good whiskey and knowing what good whiskey tastes like.
It definitely helps. Yeah, it definitely helps.
You seem to have achieved that. You know what you like and you know the notes you like to pull out of a whiskey. So that's half the challenge. Now all you have to do is make it. That's easy enough, right?
Oh yeah.
So yeah, amazing. We'd open a distillery here.
Well, the good news is you like your your father and your grandfather before you put in the work. You started and from the ground up, and I think that's what it takes. But it works because we get to experience it every day. We're all lucky that your grandfather started what he did, and your father joined him. And now you're joining him. I mean, we got a lot to look forward to as whiskey drinkers when it comes to Wild Turkey.
Absolutely, and I'll say that it's not just us; it's the whole industry, from top to bottom. If you look at the big guys, even the quote unquote non-bourbon guys that are real big, like your Jack Daniels and George Dickel, I include them with us. Corn whiskey, American whiskey, everybody from Jack Daniels, who's the biggest, on down to some of these smaller guys here in Kentucky that I think are doing awesome stuff, like New Riff or Wilderness Trail, those type of guys. Everybody's making amazing liquid. If you're a bourbon fan, if you're an American whiskey fan, no matter what it is, this is your time. You can get great stuff for $40, $50, $60 a bottle that I think is as good as ever been made in history.
Absolutely.
It's a good time to be a whiskey drinker.
Oh, yeah.
Sure. All right, Bruce. Well, we know we got to let you go. Unfortunately, we could keep talking with you all day, but we know you're busy. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing some of your family stories. Thank you for sharing this wonderful whiskey. We're excited for you, and we look forward to everything you have to offer in the future. And we'd like to have you back sometime soon and hear about all the new things you're working on. Yeah,
it's my pleasure. Anytime y'all want me to hop on here and talk shop and drink a little bit of whiskey, it's just nice. It's almost like the world's back to normal. I'm just sitting here drinking with some buddies, talking shop, drinking some Rare Breed. So I appreciate y'all having me on.
Thank you, bud. We appreciate having you on, and it's great to sit down and chat with you. Come on down.
All right, boys. Well, let's pour another dram of this Wild Turkey.
There you go.
Enjoy it. Everyone, thank you for joining us today. And as always, cheers.
Hey everyone, thanks again for tuning in to the Capital City Bourbon Show. We have more great episodes planned for you in the future, so come back and join us on the porch. Cheers, y'all.